Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
This is a child's ossuary. And the lid's kind of off of it.
Can you see the symbols on the side here?
Yeah, it's got nice
That's
rosette
very classic.
patterns.
Yeah, it's very classic.
So we are in a museum vault.
Well, welcome to today's program. My name is Dr. George Sparks. My co-host is Dr. David Graves. He's an experienced archaeologist with over 30 years. Today we got a very interesting program, as we always try to do for you out there. And of course, it's sponsored by Bible Interact. What do I have in front of me, David? It is a
ossuary.
Today we're going to talk about what we call these burial boxes, bone boxes, called the ossuaries. Since 1976, it's been prohibited to take them out of Israel because they are called a national treasure, because these ossuaries were used by the Jewish population in the first century BC and AD. So let's just say during the time of Jesus, if you will, that helps. Also, what's interesting is then what is this doing in front of me? I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, if you can't take them out of Israel since 1976. Well, years ago, David, I was visiting a home of a Jewish family, and this is probably about back in the 1990s. And on the mantle of their fireplace, they had this ossuary box. It was brought home by their son, who participated in the 1967, if I said war, the 6-Day War. And then he returned home. And he returned home with this ossuary box. However, what they thought it was a planter, because not everybody's an archaeologist, right? And it does look like, take away the lid, it does look like a planter. And this is not so unusual, because there was times where I was with a tour group in Israel, and we were staying at the American Colonial Hotel. And I'd have members of the group stand in front of these ossuaries. But at that time, they didn't know what they were, because they actually had flowers in them. There'd be like a half a dozen of them or more. So I'd take their pictures, and then we would go on tour. And of course, we go to the Israel Museum, where they have ossuary box on display. You know, some of the more elaborate ones, some of the more popular ones. And then towards the end of the trip, I'd give these individuals or families pictures of them standing in front of the ossuary box at the American Colonial Hotel. And I'd ask, do you see anything, or can you identify anything in here that strikes your attention? Most of them would say no. And then I pointed out, I said, these flower pots are actually ossuaries. So it does happen. It's not that uncommon. Of Israel back in 1967. And this young man at that time actually carried it back on a plane flight on his lap. He had it because it's made out of very soft limestone. So imagine carrying this home with you. You got to be young to think like that, to give it to your parents. And there it was in the house for several decades. So anyway, this is how we ended up with it, because I said, well, you know, that's actually an ossuary box. And I would like to actually, since it's already in the United States, have it on display at museums.
Some people travel, you know, and they come back and all they gave me was a T-shirt. This guy comes back and his mom says, all you brought me back was a flower pot.
Flower pot, yeah. A postcard in the flower pot.
So there's lots of them in Israel. There's thousands and thousands of these, probably a few thousand in just the storage in museums. But everybody that died in the first century period, we call it the Second Temple period, used these to bury their loved ones in. They put the bones in them. So lots of them floating around. So not unusual, but it's really special for you to have one sitting on your lap today, George.
We came up with this idea just a few days ago, and I said, David, I might be able to get an ossuary if I do. Let's talk about it. So I think I went into a museum vault with permission from the CEO, and they gave me permission to take this ossuary out, the Museum of Archaeology and Biblical History. And they gave us, Bible Interact, permission to use this ossuary, a national treasure, for our podcast today. So with great appreciation and respect, to what this item represents. I have my privilege and your privilege to actually be able to make this presentation and podcast for the population, and I hope they enjoy it
Now,
very
George,
much. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
you need to point out that not all ossuaries are the same size, and this one
Okay. Yeah.
happens to be a little tiny one. And so normally, you wouldn't be just picking this thing up and putting it on your lap, but you can explain more on that.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned it and you kind of thank you for not stealing my thunder. I appreciate this.
Yep.
This is actually a child's ossuary. That's what David is trying to say. So adult ossuary could probably be 3-4 times this size, and there's no way I could get that on the camera. And they did have an adult ossuary there, and it was fabulous.
Remember, we had that child's ossuary? Check this out. Also, they have an adult ossuary. Probably 1st, 2nd century AD, BC. Unbelievable. Intact. Perfect.
But for a representation that I could actually pick up, seeing that I'm not Arnold today, someday I'll be Arnold and able to get the adult one, but not today. We have what we have, and it's greatly appreciated. And it is a child's ossuary. And of course, the content, the bones, remained in Israel where they are respected. And there they lie in state. Okay, so there's nothing in this ossuary, and there's no disrespect. So with that in mind, let me give everybody like a formal type of a definition of what an ossuary is. An ossuary is a box made to serve the final resting place of a human skeletal remains. So it's not good. It's not for flesh. It's not what we call a sarcophagus, like the Egyptian sarcophagus behind me. It's much smaller, and all it's going to contain is bones. They are frequently used in burials to preserve space. So if you have a family tomb, let's just say an ancient mausoleum, and there's going to be generations of your people there. You want to conserve space. You can't load it up with sarcophagus. You got to use what we call the ossuaries. So they are conserving space. The body was first placed in a temporary grave. Now, when we say grave, sometimes they just lie in state, and they would lie in state for about a year for the flesh to decompose. And then they were placed, the bones were washed off, usually with wine and ointment, and then placed in this ossuary box. Now, ossuary, beginning of the word ossuary, ossi or osi, is actually a Latin word meaning bone, all right? So ossi is Latin for bone, the bone box. This, once again, greatly reduced the space. And this is where it was stored. And it was supposed to be stored, not always as we think in Christianity for the resurrection. It could be just stored as a family mausoleum by wealthy families. And we'll explain this later. Now, I briefly used the word sarcophagus. So a sarcophagus comes from now, not Latin, but Greek, meaning, first of all, when we say sarx, meaning flesh, and then the word at the end, like sarcophagos, okay, meanings flesh eating. So if we ever see the word like lithos, meaning stone, lithos sarcophagus, it means flesh eating stone. It's the box in which the corpse is going to be placed, knowing that it will be consumed by parasites, the flesh eating box. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to bring up some information about the ossuary. Now, this is kind of interesting because I went and did some more research on like a small history about the ossuary. They basically started about the 1st century BC and ends about the same time as the temple is destroyed at the end of the first Jewish revolt. So initially they were used by the wealthy. And by the wealthy in Jerusalem, I'm talking about the Sadducees, those that controlled the temple. Now, not only did the wealthy use these, because they're the ones that could afford the ossuaries and afford to have the tombs cut out of limestone, but there was also, go ahead.
Do you know why they were called Sadducees?
Are you going to say because they're so sad, you see, of the resurrection or whatever?
There you go.
They did not believe in the afterlife. They did not believe in the type of resurrection as the Pharisees did and the Essenes. So yes, the Sadducees, they did not believe in the resurrection, but
that's why they're Sadducee.
That's why you're Sadducee, you know,
So,
or unless you're in America, then it's oh say can you see.
Anyway,
But,
I have a way to remember it, and you can continue on now. I've got my humor out of the way.
Oh, you got more. So the Sadducees also were kind of, they were looked down by other Jewish, you could say sects, like
Pharisees.
like the Sadducees and also the Essenes. And one of the reasons for that, David, is because they had what others believed introduced to their religious format Hellenistic customs, such as from the time period of that Maccabean revolt, to get rid of that Greek influence in the land of Judea around the temple. So it did influence the people, but some of it did carry on, as we know. Some of the idea of, let's say, this Hellenistic culture, we find actually in a few ossuaries. So that statement kind of has a little validation.
Now you've got some fancy pictures on your bone box there, some rosettes that are carved
Some
into.
rosettes. Yeah.
So any name on it? Because a lot of times they would put the family name on the box.
Yeah, there's no names on this box. David's right. They do have names, but no names on this box whatsoever.
Okay.
How was this Hellenistic custom found in the ossuary box? Well, one of these Hellenistic, I'll just say, traditions was to leave coins on the eyes or under the tongue or on the tongue of the deceased, because it was going to be used to pay the ferryman to cross the river Styx. So sometimes, as the body decomposes, they had placed the skull and the remains in the box, but in the skull there would still be, let me show you one here, skull, and if you hear it, there'd be coins left in the skull, or there'd be coins left in the bone box. So that's one indication that that there was possibly in some occasions that custom that was being used among the Sadducees.
But it was also help us with our dating.
With what? Oh, of course.
The dating
Because
because of the
it would have
coin.
dates on it. I'm going to remove this lid, but because they do have lids.
You said there wasn't anything in the box.
Well, no bones.
There you go.
But I'm trying to conserve space here on the desk. So sometimes they actually find coins inside the ossuary among the skeletal remains.
What do
Also,
they?
two were cut from the soft limestone around Jerusalem. And these became what we would call today like family mausoleums. Now, in rare occasions, if you're a tourist, you might have the opportunity to enter into one of these tombs. And if you notice very carefully that the floors are usually depressed in, they're cut down lower. And the reason for that is that it was easier to cut the floor down than it is to cut the ceiling up higher. Make sense?
Yep.
So that's why we find the floor actually depressed.
One
Yeah, go ahead.
one of these Dominus Flavet, and that
The
is
Dominus-
the
okay.
Dominus Flavet, and it's actually a church
Yes.
across from the Temple Mount. It's up in the garden where all the modern Jewish tombs are, but there's a church, and in the basement underneath of it, there is a whole room full of ossuaries. I'll put a picture up for everyone to see, but you can go there and visit it, and you can look inside and see all the ossuaries as they were discovered in situ, which is kind of neat. It's a bit hard to find on the Mount of Olives slope, looking toward Jerusalem. You can see it on the right-hand side going down. So that's all I want.
That is a good. If you look that up, it just is easy to Google. First of all.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is a good selection of ossuaries that are underneath that church facility.
Yeah.
That you mentioned it. I forgot all about that. But,
Yeah. It's hard to find, as I said. It took
Yeah.
Scott and I quite a while to locate it. There's a small sign, but you have to go through a gate, through a wall, and then you're into the church complex on the Mount of Olives.
So you're talking about Dr. Scott Stripling. You said Scott, but just so everybody knows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He's a good friend, and Dr. Scott Stripling.
Okay.
He and
Because
I,
you said Scott, that could be any.
yeah,
I know you guys were buddies, or are buddies. Yeah, because you guys were on a program with us, the three amigos, and you talked about 3 different discoveries, 3 different locations. That was a great program. It did really, really well.
yeah, we've dug together for over 15 years, so we're pretty close friends. Okay, so we've got a little bit of contents in your bone box. Do you?
Well, yeah, but so we talked about going inside, like if you do go inside an actual first century tomb, which they have one in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's towards the back. You know, everybody's lined up to see the tomb of Jesus, but it's all covered with marble, right? But if you go around back, I think it's the Armenian section. There's a section of the wall that's been removed, and inside or behind that wall is a first century tomb. All right. And you have to step down, stoop, and then step down to get inside it. And you'll see a bench, right, where the body is placed and where it decomposes. And then there's a niche in the wall where after the body decomposes, their bones are placed into the ossuary, and the boxes then are placed into that niche as a way to conserve space. All right. That type of a tomb is actually in the church. So, so you can actually, and it's really interesting because in the gospel, it actually mentions that it says when this disciple whom Peter loved, John, and I think it says the disciple whom Jesus loved outran Peter. That's a nice way of saying that. John outran Peter. He gets to the tomb and he says, we stoop down to look inside.
Right.
And if you have an opportunity to go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and you stoop down to look inside that, I'm just going to say small mausoleum, first century tomb, bring that scripture to mind because it's almost like it's like you're there, and it's a lot of fun when you take a scripture and you say, so this is what they were talking about. This is what's going on.
For the audience to understand, this wasn't that the church was built there and then they built this mausoleum inside the church. It's the other way around. These were caves and cemeteries and tombs that were carved out of the rock in the first century. And then they built the church around it to commemorate that particular holy spot or holy location.
Exactly.
Same thing with the Dominus Flavet, which is the Church of the Weeping, is what that stands for. So it's traditionally where Jesus went, and it said that Jesus wept. So that's why it's been called that. So just to make sure everybody understands that these are not something that are made in churches, but rather they are something that existed and the churches were built on top of them.
That's very interesting. And but you know, when we talk about the tombs that were there before the Byzantine church was built, probably located by Helena, the wife of Constantine,
Yep.
and then later constructed, and then since then destroyed and more added. But anyway, when we talk about the tombs and the ossuaries, I think it's interesting to note the Greek word for these masons, the people that carve out of stone, is tekton. And it's interesting to note that in the Bible it says that Joseph or Jesus was the carpenter's son. So Joseph being a carpenter. That's the way it's translated. That actually the Greek word is tekton. So it might be more appropriate and correct to say that, well, the family were stonemasons.
Yeah.
And where would you be more gainfully employed during the reign of Herod? Because when we go to Israel, we visit all these sites that Herod built, and he didn't build them out of wood. He didn't use carpenters. He used masons. So you think, where are you going to get gainful employment during probably the first half of the first century Common Era AD? Be a mason. You're going to find work. And that is a tekton, right? So also inside a mausoleum, what do we find? We find the bench. And the bench might be underneath what we call an archaeological. It's like an arch like this. If there's like a bench here and it's flat, then you got an archway, and it's incised into the wall of the tomb. And I'm sure we're going to bring up pictures for this. It's called an archaeological. And the body's laid there for about a year and it's decomposed, right? Then the body is, the bones are taken and it's placed into a bone box. Really, it's washed and then put into the ossuary, the bone box. And then it's placed into the niche in the wall. And I keep on saying a niche. Actually, the word is a loculi. Right. So if you see the word loculi, and we could probably add a picture in where it gives you demonstrations of the archaeological and the loculi, so everybody knows what that means. And this is saving space for the remaining members of generations genealogy of that family. Now,
put the name on the side of the bone box for many of them. We have names of many New Testament
Are you reading my notes?
Familiar names to them. No, I just, but you
Because
go
that's
ahead.
what's next. But if you want to run with it, if you want to,
We did another PowerPoint a while ago where we had run over some of the famous ossuaries that have names on them. We have the Caiaphas, the high priest,
right,
was believed to be the high priest. We have the James ossuary, which became quite famous, and then we have one with the name of Jesus on it.
right.
And some have tried to claim, well, there's no way, that's Jesus, because if Jesus was in a bone box, he wasn't raised from the dead. What people don't realize is that we actually have 22 ossuaries with the name Jesus on them. So as we say, will the real Jesus please stand up? Well, in this case, he rose up. But we have 22 different individuals with that name because it was a common name. Simeon, 59 ossuaries with a name on it. Joseph, 45. Judah, 44. John, 25. Matthew, 17. Jonathan, 14. So there's a whole lot of different names. Miriam or Mary, 42 different ossuaries. So it was a very common, these were common names. So people think that, just because we find a name Jesus on an ossuary, that must mean he's the Jesus of Nazareth. And that's why the New Testament distinguishes this Jesus from other Jesuses who lived in the first century. He's the Jesus who lived and came from Nazareth. So to try and make a whole lot of nothing just because we find the name Jesus doesn't mean the resurrection didn't happen. Doesn't mean we found the ossuary that Jesus was buried in. It just simply means that it was a common name. I'll put the graph up, and Richard Bauckham and Ben Witherington and their works have identified these. So when you do the statistics, we find that it's probably statistically impossible that this is the Jesus of Nazareth that we're talking about.
So you actually, that was exactly my next line. Almost verbatim, such as the names found on ossuaries.
Okay.
The high priest Caiaphas. My next one was James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus, like you were saying. And of course, that one comes with a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
Some scholars believe, some scholars suggest, I should say, that part of the inscription is authentic and part of the inscription is maybe forged.
Altered or added. Yeah.
Later added. But it went to court and it was inconclusive. That's all we can say. We can't say it's forged because legally it's inconclusive, but it is rather suspicious in some occasions. We just have to be careful how we say that. Also, there was an ossuary with the name of Alexander of Cyrene, and some actually suspect this might be the son of Simon of Cyrene.
Right.
And that's pretty cool too. That leads me on to what types of artifacts are found in these family tombs? So here we go. We got to talk about, well, first of all, we have a child ossuary, as we see right here. Now I got a fragment of an adult ossuary to let you see how big and grandiose they can be. I don't know if you can see the size of this right here.
Yeah, beautiful rosette.
Look how deep that's carved into that too.
And I'll show a photograph of a Herodian block that we excavated at Tel El Hammam with a beautiful rosette on it. So I have one of those as part of the building structure of probably the bath complex of Herod Antipas. So the rosette was a common motif that was used on many things, not just ossuaries, but also on buildings. And
So
sometimes
you could say, here's a simple rosette here, and the other one's absolutely fantastic. You can imagine a whole bone box with, 4 or 5 or 6 of those rosettes in an adult ossuary is incredible.
Yeah.
But that's an example of it, so everybody can see that.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we always find in tombs. You know what we find in tombs? Not necessarily in an ossuary, but in tombs. The lamp.
Sure.
So lamps we can find, like in one occasion they were widening a road outside of Jerusalem and they actually bumped into a tomb that they didn't know was there. So they actually took the artifacts. IAA showed up, the Israel antiquity authority showed up. And a lot of those artifacts were taken out, the ossuaries. And of course, the ossuaries are probably in storage, but the lamps themselves are very common. Lamps are so common. So a friend of mine was able to achieve like 50 lamps out of that tomb. And lamps are lamps. The lamps are like light switches of the ancient world. Everybody's got to have one.
Light
So,
bulbs.
yeah, so here's a lamp because it's dark in the tomb. So you're going to find lots of lamps. Now, what else? Well, of course, we can find coins. So here's a different selection of coins. You can have, in some occasions, a shekel. And then we have like what we call a denarii. That's where we get the word dime from, because it's the size of a dime. And on the very bottom are what we call the lipta and the pruta. The lipta and pruta are in the King James called the widow's mite, the smallest of all coins. The widow had she gave everything she had, and it was very small, almost insignificant, and it is called the widow's mite, but the technical names are either the pruta or the lipta. Now, these are referred to in the Bible as the tribute penny, where Jesus says, well, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? Well, show me, the tribute penny. And he says, whose image? Well, Caesar. Well, actually, this is the denarii. And it's where we get the word dime from. It's the same side. But coins that we find in ossuaries are in the family tombs. Okay. Another thing, because of the decomposing flesh. Now, remember when Jesus went to the tomb of Lazarus and he says, roll the stone away. And the sister of Lazarus, what she say? Lord, it's been 3 days. It's going to smell. That's what she said, almost verbatim. If you want to use King James, it stinketh.
Yeah.
What do we find in tombs? Perfume bottles. They could be made out of terracotta, but if somebody could afford a tomb and an ossuary, they probably have glass bottles in their tombs because they're wealthy and they think nothing of it. Why? Because it's perfume, and you're going to need perfume if you want to go in there a year later and remove the excess flesh from the bone and wash it off and put it into an ossuary. So to mask the smell, you have perfume bottles. In rare occasions, as you mentioned in your podcast, about 2 weeks ago, in rare occasions, we have evidence of crucifixion. I'll put this down here if everybody can see it. And in one case, we had a bone that was pierced by a nail in an ankle. And it was attached to the wooden beam of a cross, and it was bent. You can see here, maybe right there, the nail was bent. So they couldn't pull it out. So they just had to remove the ankle bone separately, and it was placed into an ossuary box. Not a child's ossuary. This was a man that was in his 20s.
And
Yes.
just to clarify for the audience, that particular one that you're holding is a reproduction.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully they know that.
Hopefully,
But you know what? We do have real stuff here. So we have, what do you find in the tomb? You can find lamps because it's dark.
that's a real one.
You can find coins. Sometimes because of the custom of the Hellenistic custom being represented in the tomb, where they place them on the tongue of the deceased as a coin for the ferryman. Maybe it's just a myth or tradition, but it was one of the things that they do find. Another thing is, of course, the perfume bottles are found in tombs because of the decomposition of the flesh.
And that's an original.
That is an original. All right. And the difference between a child's ossuary and an adult's ossuary. I show this fragment again, how large that is. That's just a section. Look, compared to this child's ossuary, that's just a small section.
Mhm.
So you can imagine how heavy this is going to be and how large it's going to be. Another thing I'd like to state is that when archaeologists have found these types of items in tombs, and we get to understand the customs of why the ossuary and why it was used, it might help to understand certain passages of scripture, David.
Yeah.
Such as we got the Luke chapter 9, verse 60, and also Matthew chapter 8 and verse 22. Now, I'm not going to go into the scriptures. Everybody will know what I'm talking about. You can always look it up. It was about a follower of Jesus, not necessarily a disciple, but at least somebody that was participating in listening to Jesus. And he says, permit me to bury my father. And then Jesus turns around and says, let the dead bury their dead. You come follow me. You think, what is up with that? What's so hard? Today, a funeral is like a couple hours and it's done and it's over. But in the ancient world, it's a ceremony. It's a process. The body, you think, if you already have the tomb carved, if you already have the ossuaries finished, just alone preparing the body, letting it decompose, possibly a year. Then the custom of putting the bones into the ossuary and storing it. The man just said to Jesus, hey, permit me, I need to leave for probably a year, maybe a year and a couple months. And Jesus might be saying, sir, we don't have that time. The message is now. The kingdom of God is at hand. And it helps us to understand the scriptures and the personality of Jesus not being compromised because of misunderstanding. So in this little presentation, and I know we've got a little bit more to add because we want to be very careful about how we do get these ossuaries, right, David?
Yes.
But also in respect of the ossuary and of the Gospels, to explain firsthand, being present, the use of the ossuary, when they were being used, how they were being used, and artifacts being represented in the tomb, as we have done right now, for you, our viewers, of biblical archaeology from the ground down. I thank you very much. I thank you for visiting the program and letting me share this experience, both, and David, of course. Now we want to talk about something else briefly, and that's acquiring something illegally on the market.
Yes.
And
In
go ahead,
March
Dave.
in March of 2014, the Israeli Antiquities Authorities did a raid, and they were able to discover a number of ossuaries. I think there was 10 or 20 of them that they discovered. They were illegal, and the people ended up getting put in prison. They got a 4 to 5 year sentence for it. So you don't want to be taking ossuaries out of the country, and otherwise you can get into a lot of trouble. This particular one that George is displaying today was acquired prior to the cutoff date when taking these ossuaries out of the country became illegal. So you can maybe add a few more details to that, George. But
Oh, sure. The law let's say, the law prohibiting taking ossuaries out of the country is back in 1976. And like I mentioned to the listeners, this was taken out of the country in 1967 by a soldier in the IDF that participated in the 1967 war. And I say that with all respects because I know right now there's a lot of controversy going on among citizens of the United States of the conflicts going on over in the land of Israel and also West Bank and Gaza. And we're aware of that. And for me and David, understand that this is solely about archaeology, nothing political who we want to get involved with. So the understanding of the customs of the period of a time 2,000 years ago, that's what we're talking about and sharing with you today.
our purpose is to try and preserve and display for humanity the antiquities of old. And so these particular artifacts that we're displaying here are ones that we're able to bring to our audience because you've acquired them through legal means with licenses and so forth. And in many respects, most of these are items that we have are not that rare. They're very, very common, and so there's lots of them in many, many different museums that people can look at and display. And if we were to send that back, it would probably sit in a warehouse somewhere, collecting
Yeah.
dust and no one would ever see it. So we're not doing anything illegal, nor are we doing anything unethical. So just to make that clear to our audience. We're,
Right.
we're
Very true. Like we said, with all respect to what this represents in an ancient culture. But David, at this moment, I don't have nothing more to add. I do thank our viewers. We just passed 201,000 subscribers. Do you believe that, David?
I don't believe it.
Yeah. So,
We
no,
want to
greatly appreciate.
thank every one of our subscribers and everybody that views the videos, and leave a comment if you have a question or something of interest. Those that are the bots, you can stay away. Thank you very much. Those that say we're
Those that
AI,
what?
the bots can stay away.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, we've been accused of what was that we being AI generated?
Yeah. I think I'd be more a beautiful blonde or something that you would have instead of
Definitely,
me.
definitely. I get you replaced, David. You definitely have to be.
Anyway, we really appreciate all the viewers out there and those of you that have liked and share our videos. So till next time, I'm signing off, Dr. Graves and Dr. Spark.
And so everybody have a great day. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much. What I have displayed is a first century ossuary box, meaning a bone box. It is during that time period in custom among the Jewish population to let the body decompose and then place the bones into these small boxes. So it actually conserves the space in a family mausoleum. So what do we actually find in a family tomb during that first century? Well, because the bodies are placed there for a year to let the flesh decompose, we have glass perfume bottles to mask the smell of decomposing flesh. Because a tomb is dark, we find lots of first century lamps. This particular lamp is called a Herodian lamp. Third, we can actually find coins. And the reason why we might find coins is there is a scholarly debate that among some of the Sadducees, they also incorporate Hellenistic customs, such as putting a coin under the tongue of the deceased for money to pay the ferryman as they cross the river Styx. And this is a suggestion. Lastly, very rare occasions, extremely rare, artifacts have been found that prove crucifixion. In one case, we have a small ankle bone. And here we have a nail that was driven into the ankle bone but could not be removed. So as it was removed or detached from the cross beam, the flesh being removed and then placed into an ossuary box. But once again, this is a child ossuary. An adult ossuary could be 3 or 4 times this size. And I'll give you an example of that now. Here is just a small example of a rosette incised or fragment of an adult ossuary. Now I'm going to move the camera so you can see this. In comparison with this child's ossuary, this is just a fragment of adult ossuary. So it could be almost 4 times the size, right? So with that in mind, and this is the first century customs of the Jewish population around Jerusalem of the ossuary burials. Have a great day. Thank you for your time.